The ketogenic diet is something that has just come up as a really important tool as we dive into cancer and things that can be applied to overcoming in general. And Craig is one of the originals in the movement with his wife Maria, and he lays out things in a really easy to understand way as we really try to decide for ourselves what diet is the best for us. Craig, I am so excited to be visiting with you, brother. You are one of the the OGs in the whole keto world, and so you have you and your wife an absolutely incredible assortment of resources and books that you've done, and so I want to visit with you just to get that experience, and because I feel like the ancestrally appropriate way of eating is probably what's going to be in our best interest health wise, especially for me coming through the cancer lens. And so if you will, just how did you get into keto? And then we'll go to the extreme of carnivore.
Thanks, Logan, for having me on. Yeah. So my personal story, it's kind of an interesting one. Over a number of years, my wife Maria, she had some health issues herself. She had PCOS. She had acid reflux and some different issues, and she was doing everything she was told to do. And this was 25 years ago. She was, eating healthy whole grains and eating low fats and everything that was in the mainstream, what was taught to do to be healthy. And she still had these problems. She still had like 50 pounds or more of extra weight she was carrying around, and she was running marathons. And it just, she's like, okay, I'm doing everything I'm told. Why is this not working? And so she went into college for nutrition and a lot of the same stuff, food pyramid, which she was taught, and she just started looking on her own and digging into books and science and articles. And through her process of finding low carb keto, she reversed her PCOS. She reversed her acid reflux. She lost the extra weight, even though she stopped running marathons because it was hard on her joints. But even though she stopped running the marathon, she lost the extra weight, eating this way. And everybody, of course, then wanted to know what she was doing. And so she started coaching and helping people like 20 plus years ago on this lifestyle. And we saw incredible results. It just kept snowballing. And it came to a point at one point where we wanted to adopt. And it was, the big downturn in 2007, the housing crash. I lost my job, as a lot of people did around that time. And it's put our adoption on hold, which was really hard for us. And so she said, some friends of hers said, why don't you write a book of all these recipes that you give out to your clients, and they're having such amazing results, and advertise this book as helping pay for the adoption. And so that's what we did. And she wrote a book, and it helped pay for the adoption. We adopted our boys a few years later, and it just snowballed from there. I mean, next book. Pretty soon we got a publisher. Now we've got, I don't know, 20, 30 books published, between books and ebooks. And it's just been an incredible journey. My personal story, it took me a little longer than her to get to this lifestyle because I didn't have the health issues she had. So I didn't have she had PCOS and acid reflux. I didn't have any of those health issues really. I was, at the time I was fairly healthy. I just had some extra weight, maybe 20, 30 pounds of extra weight I could have gotten rid of, which, was, didn't bother me that much. And and I like to brew my own beer and do different things from my German background. And so it took me 5, 6 years after her to really come around to this lifestyle. And then once I did, I felt so much better and everything. And I've been that way for, I don't know, 18 plus years now that I've eaten this way.
So Craig, in y'all's carnivore cookbook, I mean, actually a little bit of a misnomer because y'all have done an incredible job laying out the science and making things very understandable before you even get into a recipe. So let's go through a little bit of that, the human anatomy around how we're set up to eat, how we're set up to digest. Where did you come to with all of that?
Yeah, so that's what I love is, my background's actually in electrical engineering. And so when I stepped away from that to be in our business full time, I just dove into the science and dove into the biochemistry and how the body was work. And, I like to put a lot of that. And what I started doing was in our keto book and our carnivore book, I started writing a lot of the front matter, the science about our bodies, how they work, and all this kind of stuff. And in writing this book, the Carnivore Cookbook, I really wanted to dive in how the human body is designed, and especially the ancestral history of how we became human in the first place. And we can touch on that maybe a little more later. But if you look at the digestive system of humans, there's very distinct differences between humans and other primates. One of them is that the differences between our large intestine and small intestine. Okay. Our large intestine, a large bowel, which is good for digesting, plant matter and that kind of stuff, is about 1/3 as long as other primates. And if you look at our long intestine, it's like 1/3 longer than other primates. And that's good for digesting meat. So we've kind of, and then the other component is the cecum. The cecum is this pouch that in animals that really can digest plant matter like fiber, if the fiber will sit in that pouch and ferment and turn into saturated fatty acids and things the body can use. The human cecum is just this tiny little bump at the beginning of in the digestive tract. It's this little bump, really doesn't hold anything and anymore, and that's why we don't digest fiber. Fiber goes right through us, right? And so if you look at how the body's designed and how and take it way back now and go back to our early ancestors that became human in the first place. So, you talk 150, 100,000 years ago, you're talking about Neanderthals and early humans. They became human in the first place, started to shift their biology and grow these big brains and shrink their guts. And what's really important to understand is what were they eating that made them do that, right? What were they eating that made their brains grow and become so much smarter and their guts shrink and become so much different than other primates? Well, there's anthropological evidence now, and there's tons of studies on this. They look at the bone collagen, okay? And if you look at the bone collagen and the nitrogen concentration in it, you can tell where the protein came from that they ate. Was it a plant protein? Was it an animal protein? What type of animal was it from? They can actually see this in the bone collagen. And they've done this now, many, many studies on Neanderthals and early human bones. And they found they were apex carnivores. They were higher on the carnivore level than the hyenas and lions of that same time period. So they tested the lions and their bone collagen. Those early humans were even more carnivorous than the lions. And so we were growing these big brains and our guts shrink because we were primarily eating animal proteins.
That's so interesting because when you think about a lot of the almost I don't know how to say that without causing a stir, the vegetable based narrative. How about that? Is they compare like a gorilla to us, and they're big, strong, and they're vegetarian, right? And so like based off of what you're saying about the digestive system, it's really a stark contrast in human and gorilla digestive.
Well, that's the
system.
difference. Yeah, a gorilla is big and strong, and their gut, their digestive system is is very different than ours. Again, it's the lengths of the intestines are 3 times different. They have this big stomach that can hold all this plant material. They've got cecum that can ferment and turn all this plant matter into saturated fatty acids that the body can actually use. So yeah, they're designed to eat that way, like an ox. An ox has multiple stomachs and it can process all this stuff, and we can't do that, right? And yeah, oxes are strong, but they're designed to eat what they're eating.
Yeah. So, Dr. Bill Schindler, he's laid out a whole lot of basically just kind of mirrors what you're saying. So why do you think we still have this divided argument based off of the facts that you just said that our ancestors were plant based.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of these studies now on the anthropological evidence, of the bone collagen. I've seen dozens of them. So it's growing, it's building, this understanding. I'm not sure how old that science is or how long they've been doing those types of studies, but I know there's a lot of them now. So I think that'll help shift it a bit. I think a big part of it is there's been a sort of a campaign or a effort, if you will, to make red meat seem like this problem food. And if as a society or in mainstream media we decide that red meat's bad, then what are you going to eat? I mean, it's got to be fruits and vegetables, right? There's not much else to eat, so you got to influence more. Eat more fruits and vegetables and less red meat because this red meat thing is bad for you. Well, if you look at all the studies that supposedly support red meat being bad, there's actually a huge meta-analysis, which meta-analyses are where they look at all the available studies on a topic, and then they analyze those studies for quality of the information provided and the data supported, and put them all together into sort of one master thing. And what they found was there's little to no evidence there was either no evidence or very weak evidence of meat and cancer links, because they're all these observational type studies. What's an observational study? That's where they give somebody a food frequency questionnaire. So they'll hand you, if you're in the study, this questionnaire. It says, how often did you eat meat in the last year? How often did you eat X and Y in the last year or last 2 years? And they try to extrapolate that over a lifetime of diet and outcomes of death or cancer, etc. But it's totally confounded because if I ate a lot of McDonald's, was it the burger patty in the McDonald's that caused my problems, or was it the bun, the French fries, and the extra large milkshake that I got with it? I mean, it's all confounded data, that, and so you try to associate. This guy ate more McDonald's, so he put down he ate more meat. Was it that or all the other stuff he ate with it?
Yeah, the studies are so flawed. Early on, after my son was diagnosed with cancer, I got a hold of the China study, and so that really terrified me. And then in that, they say that they've connected animal-based proteins to cancer. And so, what is your way of filtering through that? I've come thinking that that's extremely flawed. But how is your understanding? Because that's going to be like the number one thing I believe that we're going to have the argument against is the China study.
Yeah, so the China study is interesting because one of the things you got to do is you got to look at these studies with a critical eye, and you got to look at methods. You got to look at who funded it, what kind of backing it has. I mean, for example, is in our keto book over here, I started out by laying out the case for how the sugar industry knew that their product, sugar, was causing heart disease, and they funded studies to point the finger at saturated fat. And so they funded all these studies to point the finger at saturated fat is connected with heart disease, et cetera, high cholesterol, then heart disease. And they tried to make these connections, and they funded all these studies to make that connection. And guess what? A lot of people still believe it today. And so they created this narrative that then took off and is a big reason why, red meat is vilified still today and all this stuff. But they have the documents that show. And the thing is about a study, if you tell a researcher, comb through this data and look for a connection between red meat and cancer, right? They're going to look for it. And guess what? With this kind of data, you can manipulate things. You can, when it's that loose, like what'd you eat in the past 2 years, you could probably find some correlations in there to just about anything. But the question is, if instead of looking for the red meat connection, if you looked for sugar or flour, gluten in a connection, would the connection have been twice as strong? You don't know if you're not looking for it, right? And actually the China study, Denise Minger actually did a reanalysis of, she got the data set, and she did a reanalysis of it and showed that wheat had like way higher correlation than meat did in that same data set. So, you're not going to find what you're not looking for.
I think that's beautiful. Let's go back to the plants real quick, because in the Carnivore Cookbook, y'all laid out the idea that the fruits and vegetables that we have in 2024 are completely different from the ancestral perspective. So a watermelon, thousands of years ago versus a tomato or a strawberry or a tomato, any of it is vastly different. So go into how you were able to identify that and lay that out to where it's such a it's an extreme comparison, really.
It is, and when people talk about eating paleo, you simply can't, because you can't get the fruits and vegetables that we had back then. When you look at the timeline of history, and in the book I tried to lay a lot of this out, how recent so much of this is. For example, the modern strawberry that it's only like 110, 120 years old. And before that, they were tiny, they were tart, but they find crossbreeding or strains that, are bigger and sweeter. And guess what? You know what they never do on fruits or vegetables? Create a more tart and bitter one, right? They're always creating the sweeter, more filled with sugar version of a strawberry or an apple or a grape. I mean, they just came out not too long ago with cotton candy grapes. I don't know if you've seen these in the store. They have like 3 times the sugar of regular grapes. And guess what? Regular grapes already have a lot more sugar than any ancestral grape. So we're just constantly changing these foods into sweeter, less nutrient dense, because as you add more and more sugar, you have less vitamins and minerals. The vitamin mineral content just keeps going down and down. So you have more sugar, less vitamins and minerals that can be actually helpful in that food, less fiber typically, and you just get these sugary versions that cause problems. And I remember up in northern Wisconsin, we found in the woods some wild strawberries, and we foraged around picking these wild strawberries for like an hour plus, and I got a little handful of these little berries. And first of all, that's what ancestral living is. It's not, a bucket of strawberries this big in 10 seconds, right? It's pick for an hour and you got a small handful. And guess what? Those were very tart strawberries. They weren't very sweet at all. And by the time you process them and everything, it's a couple bites worth. But now you get one strawberry that fills your hand, from the store. So we just keep making these foods. It's nothing like what our ancestors really ate.
So, Craig, I had listened to Paul Saladino and Kimberry kind of go back and forth on the animal-based versus the carnivore. And one of the things that Saladino was saying was, he was taken up for like the tropical regions, that there's a more likelihood that they were eating these fruits, and they're seasonal as far as a much longer season. And what Dr. Berry was saying was like, yeah, but they're still going to be altered by humans, right? And so Saladino didn't seem to think that. So my question on the tropical areas to where they probably did eat more plants, how different are those, have you found, from what they were 100, 200 or more years ago?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point. I would say a couple things. I know that there's been evidence as well of those along coastal regions of much higher fish intake, which would make a lot of sense, right? And if you think about it, even in these tropical regions, I mean, it's not easy getting a lot of these fruits, right? Like a coconut, you got to climb that tree and bring it down, and even if it's down, you got to be careful if it's not rotten, how long it's been laying there, kind of thing. And where fish, the thing about and there's tons of evidence of fishing going way back, and fish are going to be that food that sustains you. One of the things I like to point out, and this is not a tropical area obviously, but have you ever watched the reality show Alone? It's
Yes.
it's in Vancouver, British Columbia, I believe. And what they do is they put these people completely alone. They have no contact with anybody. They just have a camera, and they have to fend for themselves. And whoever makes it the longest is the winner. And they've had a couple of vegetarians on there, and they don't stay vegetarian more than a day or two, because the amount of time it takes and they're very knowledgeable about what plants they can eat, and they're going around and they're trying to pick all these plants to eat, and they're just not surviving because the amount of energy you expend just to go around and find the plants you can eat almost negated the calories that you took in. Where if you caught a fish and then you used all of that fish, you ate the protein and the fat on it, which is super nutrient dense, lots of vitamins and minerals, and then you took the bones, you made bone broth from it, and get more calories that way. That will actually sustain you. And then also you can even smoke it and kind of cure it a little bit to make it last longer. All these things that you can't do with plants, and you're never gonna that one catch. And the thing about fishing too is you can do it with no calories, essentially, right? You can set out a net, you can set out a line, and then go do other things, and then come back and get your catch, right? Where with the plants, you got to be out there doing it all day long to get enough calories. So I think it still points to me as the sustaining thing is definitely the animal proteins. In any case, in any climate, we were back then. We were opportunistic about any food, anything edible. You're going to eat it. I mean, you come across berries, sure, you're gobbling them up because you found something and you're going to eat them up. But to sustain yourself on those foods, I don't think is feasible.
That makes perfect sense to me. So, Craig, one thing that I'm super curious about too, that I wasn't planning on going here, but I think it's perfectly, pertinent to this conversation. The aspect of fasting as a tool and as an ancestral adaptation. So go into your thoughts on that, because that is a topic that you've covered in depth. And I think that while it wasn't done on purpose, in history, I think it has a lot of benefits to it.
So yeah, fasting, I look at fasting in two ways. I look at it from an intermittent fasting standpoint versus an extended fasting standpoint. And really the breaking point between the two is extended fasting is longer than 24 hours, where intermittent fasting is during the day you limit, when you have food or when you don't. So intermittent fasting it's a great tool for people trying to lose weight, for sure. What it primarily does is helps limit that snacking, right? So most people, when they eat this way, they just aren't as hungry as often, and so they'll naturally kind of evolve to maybe 2 meals a day. We see that all the time, keto or carnivore. They're just not as hungry, and so they just do 2 meals. It's less cooking, less cleanup, all that stuff. And those 2 meals, if you do breakfast and like a late lunch, or some people do the opposite, like a lunch dinner. And now that creates a natural intermittent fasting where you're eating maybe in 6 hours of the day, and the other 18 hours you're not eating anything. And what that does, it allows the body to sort of rest and recuperate and recover a little bit, as far as not having to worry about digestion. And there potentially are things like autophagy, which is a cellular turnover where it takes old and aging cells and it breaks them down and rebuilds new, better cells. This is happening in your body all the time. There may be some little bit of benefits from that, but I would say for the most part, as far as a weight loss thing, it's the closing the kitchen down. You're not, a bite of this here, a bite of that there. All right, I'm done. Closing the kitchen down, no more calories for the rest of the day, and that can really be helpful in that respect. Fasting longer than 24 hours, we actually don't really recommend for anyone other than maybe some cases with cancer. So with cancer, cancer is an anabolic disease. It loves growth. And so when you eat nothing, you're in a very catabolic state. You're not growing really anything, and that might be beneficial for cancer in some ways. And so there may be some therapeutic effects there that are applicable, but outside of that, if it's just general health and weight loss, we don't like fasting longer than 24 hours because you do lose muscle. So when you do an extended fast like that, you will lose some lean mass, some muscle. And we, especially as we get older, I'm over 50, as you get over 50, 60 years old, it's gets harder and harder to build muscle. And so you don't want to lose the muscle you have. And so that's why we don't really promote longer than 24 hours of fasting.
Awesome. Yeah. So on the cancer topic, Dr. Laszlo Boros has put out a lot of work around deuterium, and what he's saying really supports a ketogenic and even a carnivore diet. So are you very familiar as far as like the mitochondrial aspect, whereas, deuterium may be one of the as Dr. Barry told me, he said that may be the number one reason that it works, but it's still a theory that he's not ready to just completely get behind, 100%. So Craig, what are your thoughts around that topic?
Well, there's definitely been some studies that have shown some beneficial effects of this diet and lifestyle with cancer. I mean, we've had quite a few clients ourselves who, have seen really pretty miraculous results with, cancers that were aggressively growing, especially like brain cancers and some of these like glioblastomas and things that are really challenging, obviously. And this lifestyle, this keto, very low carbohydrate, or even carnivore lifestyle, they'll see it stop growing and maybe even shrinking. And so this, and there's even people in this community. I know, I think his name is Logan as well. He's a big promoter. I can't remember his name exactly, but he had a glioblastoma and he's been able to control it with diet for a number of years now. And he's out speaking about it and doing things around it. So there's definitely application there for this lifestyle and cancer. I've even heard some people discuss with the chemotherapy drugs. One of the reasons they may have benefit is because you can't keep any food down. And guess what? When you don't eat anything, you're basically fasting, which causes autophagy to increase, which cellular turnover, which puts you in a catabolic state, which actually puts you in a ketogenic state. When you don't eat any food, when you fast, your ketones rise within a couple of days pretty quickly. Right. And so, are all those kind of things actually benefiting as much or more than the drugs? It's hard to say, but that's one theory I saw put out there too.
There's two things there, Craig. As early on, I had listened to Bulletproof Radio, Dave Asprey, quite a bit, and then he happened to just mention insulin potentiated chemotherapy, and so that kind of took me down this rabbit trail. And one thing that Lander always was in a fasted state before he received chemo. And so I can't help but think that had a major contribution to him overcoming the disease. And I don't understand why that we're not talking about that more. Dr. David Harper, talked to him recently. He's put out a ton of work with keto and cancer, and there's so much evidence, so much studies in that regard. And then, another thing that was really curious, a little bit of a tangent, Dr. Mark Circus has a theory out there that he says it's the sodium bicarbonate that they give before chemo that actually has more of an effect than the chemo itself. So I think that there's a lot of mechanisms that we're not really paying attention to enough in the mainstream medical community.
Yeah, there's so much to cancer that is like that. Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And yet these drugs are really doing harm. I mean, they're making people, they're damaging them in ways. They're causing a lot of inflammation and, while they're attacking these things. And I don't know. I mean, and one of the other things, I read a couple books on cancer and, metabolic disease relationships to cancer. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting when they're talking in this book about studies is they were trying to study, A versus B with respect to cancer. but it's now seen in the cancer or healthcare community that it's unethical to not give them chemo. And so in both cases, they had to also give them chemo. And so it's like, how do you really study something, because they feel it's unethical to not give somebody with these cancers chemo. So, how do you really know if it's, without it, if it's different or better?
Craig, one thing that it really keeps me up at night is, on one hand, Lander being cancer free is something that's hard to question what happened, right? Like, what the journey was the journey, and we know what the result is, to date. So, but the other thing is the side effects, right? The long term side effects of chemo, radiation. Honestly, one of the worst experiences that we had was actually a bowel obstruction based off of scar tissue from his first surgery, and that was horrible. So it's just all of these side effects, these long terms. The Red Devil was one of the chemos that he got, and it is known for, like, it's not if but when it damages the heart. And so there's all these things that come into play that we're really trying to stay ahead of, and I feel like the only thing that we have control over is that diet and lifestyle. So for me, it's not that I have any sort of an agenda at all. I want to know what is going to give my child the best bet of thriving in life. And so I think that this topic is so important from that regard, that we got to put away all these biases and what actually helps. So how would you first address that conversation, the exact conversation I had, sitting down, looking at the oncologist and saying, what does he need to eat or not need to eat? And they said, literally, it does not matter.
Well, that's the component that I have a problem with. I'm not sitting here telling anybody to not get chemo, and I'm not sitting here saying keto or carnivore will cure cancer. I'm not saying that either. Right. I'm saying it's a tool, and it looks like it's really beneficial for a lot of people. And so we need this tool in our toolbox, right? And I think that's the problem with healthcare is, and this isn't just in the cancer community, this is healthcare across the board. They don't link the food and diet component to the disease as much as they should. So much, and part of that is just lack of education. I mean, there's been studies on this. They studied how many hours of nutrition education doctors in the United States get. And on average, it's less than 24 hours of total nutrition education. And that's in all of their undergraduate, graduate, medical school, all of it. And guess what? A lot of that training is how much glucose and soybean oil do I put in an IV when somebody's unconscious to keep them alive? That's the nutrition they're getting taught, right? And, so they're not given the tools. And so I don't blame the doctors either. I mean, they just haven't been given the training on this, and they're so busy they don't have time to, like me. It's a full-time job for me to read studies and books and papers on this, and so it's not their fault. They just don't have the tools, and they haven't been educated on nutrition. But we see every day with our clients, with people we work with, people we don't even work with, people that just followed the free information on our blog, and they come back and say, oh my gosh, I'm off of 5 medications. I'm down 50 pounds. I feel like a new person. And they just changed their diet. So, these N=1s, well, I started saving them about 8 or 10 years ago. And now we've got like 4,000 testimonies. And I can literally go in there in that folder and type up a search for any condition and get 5, 10, 20 testimonies of people having huge improvements with those conditions. Everything from Parkinson's to MS to, you name it, cancer. And so there's something there. And I think it's something that needs to be in the toolbox of every, patient as well as doctors.
Yeah. Well, Craig, to your point earlier about you don't find what you're not looking for, I think the whole theory and the philosophy behind cancer is just completely flawed, right? Like, it's still looked at as this genetic disease and a genetic origin, whereas the metabolic aspect of it makes so much more sense. And yet it's like, I guess it's like turning around a giant ship. I guess it just takes so much time or whatever. But I think we got too many people with their heads in the sands, and we got a lot of work to do to get this out there. But the other thing is, if we don't do that, we're going to continue on this road where everybody's getting worse, and cancer is so much more prevalent. And we're not actually winning this war on cancer. Like, if you just look at the numbers, the 5-year survivability is a terrible metric to try to figure out if we're winning or not. It's like we got so much work to do. But I digress. We'll get off on that little soapbox.
Whoa. No, that it's very applicable. And in this book, I wrote this. This is my disease tree, right?
Yeah.
And what it is, the outputs, the leaves, those are your diseases. Things like cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all of these types of conditions. If you look back to the root causes and not just look at it as, oh, it's genetics. There's nothing you could do to prevent this. And even today, a lot of people are talking about obesity. Well, it's just your genetics, right? But we've had people who have it all over their family tree of obesity. One person that comes to mind is Twyla, a good friend of ours. She lost 260 pounds, I believe it is, total. And she had tried everything. She had tried every diet under the sun. She had tried all these things. And then finally, when she tried this, she lost all the weight and she's maintained it. And so it's not genetics. It's the inputs. And what are the inputs? So the roots here, those are your inputs. Well, what are they? There's obviously diet. Nutrition is a huge factor. But there's others, right? There's smoking, stress, inflammation, exercise, sleep, getting enough, common sense sun exposure for your vitamin D levels. All these things are inputs to the body. And when those inputs get off, then you get the bad outputs, right? You get the cancer, you get the, autoimmune disorders and all these conditions. I think it's not 100%, but, a very large percentage of these conditions are all linked back to one of those root causes. Many times it's nutrition. Getting the nutrition off, the body, I'm more of, instead of the view that you mentioned and the typical view these days in most healthcare, your body is genetically damaged somehow. It's just going to do this. It's going to just create cancer because it's your genetics, right? I think much more so the body's going to do what it needs to do if it's given the right inputs. If you give it the right inputs, the body will take care of itself. But it's when the inputs get off that the body gets off and these metabolic disorders happen.
Absolutely. Beautifully said, my friend. Well, so I've got a really good friend that is electrical engineer by training, and he went down the whole health rabbit trail after a concussion. Actually, really got him going that direction. Tristan Scott, and so he wrote Bitcoin and Beef. That it may be a book you're familiar with. So one thing that talking with Tristan and following along what he's doing is like the quantum aspect of health, and it is definitely way beyond me, but curious as far as like Robert O. Becker, Body Electric. Is that something that you have gotten into with your training and your professional, start? And how, if so, do we translate that into kind of the keto, carnivore communities? Because I feel like that's a big missing component, is that lifestyle. We get boxed into this nutrition paradigm and don't talk about the other things, which to me is not any better than medicine. Focus on cancer as a genetic disease, right? Mm-hmm. So what is your take with, say, the Body Electric and those inputs with the sun and maybe even grounding?
Yeah, I've read that book. I've read a couple others as well. I'm an electrical engineer, and I geek out on that kind of stuff for sure. And I think there's definitely something there. I mean, for sure. I mean, I personally, when we come to Hawaii, so a little bit more about my story. I 9, 10 years ago, I started to have this chronic pain in my back and my neck and my shoulders, and it got worse. Uh, Finally, I got to a point where I just couldn't take it anymore. And long story short, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease from a tick bite. That caused a chronic inflammatory response in my own body and caused an autoimmune disorder, ankylosing spondylitis. And so while I had been keto for, 17, 18 plus years, uh, that whole time, it wasn't a food. It was another external factor, not the sun, not grounding. It was a tick bite. And it was this virus that, caused me to become inflamed and chronically inflamed, causing the autoimmune disorder. And so anyway, I have looked into a lot of this stuff, and I think that, at the end of the day, when it comes to looking at root causes, I think diet, I think, for me, dealing with the SIRS and the mold exposure and the Lyme disease and all those kind of factors have helped a lot with my inflammation. Obviously nutrition. But at the end of the day, if you look at those other factors, I think they're real. I just don't think they're the 90% of the problem kind of thing, right? And so the vast majority of Americans, they will get 90% better if they fix this other thing, which is mostly diet, maybe some, getting some sunlight, maybe some of these, reducing more exercise, better sleep, reducing your inflammation or stress. Those are the big ones. Those are the big chunks. And yeah, once you've done all that and you want to look at other things to go a little further, I think there's definitely something there.
It's like kind of the easiest first step is like fix your food, right? Like it's just
Yeah,
fix what you're making a decision around multiple times a day can have the
yeah,
biggest impact.
for
What,
sure.
let's go local. You have the experience of basically splitting time between two very different geographic areas. So what does that local food impact like on health? Is that something you've noticed a positive with? And then the second thing is I want to follow back up on the tick thing. Um, let's go there first, maybe. We are in Arkansas in the South, and alpha gal is like exploding, and it's I think it's so pertinent to this conversation with the mammal meat. What have you come across with that? One of the solutions that we've actually been able to do is we have a partner farmer that's raising emu, so that gets
Yeah,
a alternative to like beef and other ruminant meat. But
sure.
what have you seen around alpha gal? Because
Oh
honestly,
man,
it's terrifying.
it scares the crap out of me. Yeah, I hope I never get that. One of the things with my inflammation, my pain from ankylosing spondylitis, I eat primarily carnivore as a result, and that's how I personally went from keto to carnivore. Is I found that when I eliminated all the plants, my pain went down, and so for me, it was the solution to a lot of my pain. If I get too many plants in my diet, even today, I will see my inflammation go up. I will see my joint pain go up. And so for me, it was the tool to help improve my situation. And that's the way we look at it. I don't think everybody on the planet has to eat carnivore. I mean, that's not, I think everybody on the planet can benefit from a low carbohydrates, eliminating processed foods, eating more nutrient dense foods, which by the way will be prioritizing a lot of animal proteins because they are the most nutrient dense food you can eat. Um, but you don't have to eat only meat. There's plenty of people that do just fine with low carb vegetables and that kind of stuff and a keto kind of approach. Um, but for me, I just needed to eliminate them to feel better. And so, uh, if I couldn't eat the red meat, yeah, it would be a big problem for me. Here it won't be as much bad. I mean, I got ready access to lots of fresh fish, so I could do that, a lot. At home, it would be a big challenge. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to find somebody who's an emu farmer, I guess.
Surely there's some emu in Wisconsin. Hopefully
Yeah.
we don't have to deal with that and figure out what
Yeah.
is actually going on, because the alpha gal thing it just seems wild to me.
It's insane.
So Craig, where can we send the listeners to learn more? The Carnivore Cookbook. Y'all knocked it out of the park. That is a phenomenal
Thank you.
read, and I've got to get your keto book. I have I've not read that one yet. But where can we send people?
Well, after you're done, message me your mailing address and I'll get you a copy of the keto book for sure.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
But yeah, as far as finding us, probably the easiest is ketomaria.com. If you go to ketomaria.com, you can get to our free blog there. You can get to our keto-adapted.com website, which is for like all our ebooks and services and support is all through there. On the bottom is links to all of our social media channels, our YouTube, all that kind of stuff. So ketomaria.com is the place to go.
All right, Craig, thank you for taking the time and sharing all the work, because I know that there's the amount of work y'all put in has got to be extraordinary, because it's quality, and greatly appreciate you.
Thank you, Logan. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.